Welcome to episode 57 of the Cohesive Home Podcast. Are you interested in a more peaceful way of parenting and a simpler home experience for your children? In this episode, Kate interviews Simone Davies, the Montessori teacher and blogger behind the popular website, The Montessori Notebook, which helps families bring the Montessori method into their daily life. She's also about to release her new book, The Montessori Toddler, a positive parenting guide to raising little people. If you're scratching your head and asking, what's Montessori? You will learn so much from this episode. Even if you are familiar with the method, Simone shares so much wisdom and practical advice for implementing it in your home.
Simone, I am so pleased to have you joining me today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I feel honored to be included in this wonderful podcast.
Yes. Well, I may have told you a little bit about my interest in Montessori previously, and my listeners are aware of it as well, but I have had such a deep interest in the Montessori method ever since I was pregnant with my near 8-year-old. And so when I came across your Instagram, I was so inspired by all of the ideas that you share, both in your classroom space and just with your parenting classes as well. And so I think our listeners today will just really enjoy learning from you. So would you mind telling everyone just a little bit about you as well as your story?
Oh, of course. I grew up in Sydney and I was going more down the corporate path. I studied business at university and my first job was as an accountant in a tax company, which I think
wow.
And then when I had my own children, I'd already pivoted thinking I was going to go into film and media and things like this. But when I had my own children, I started looking for a school for them, and we ended up walking into a Montessori classroom, which ended up changing my life. So my children are now 18 and 16, and they both went to a Montessori preschool. I attended Montessori toddler classes with them, a parent toddler class, and it wasn't long after before I was doing like a Montessori training. And I thought I'll just do this while my kids are small. And now 15 years later, I've been working in Montessori and have my own classes in Amsterdam. And yeah, I find it delightful getting to work with both parents and children in my class. So again, I run a parent-child program here in Amsterdam.
Wow, that's an amazing story. Well, and I've been so impressed with all of the resources that you've made available for families online. You have a class and a lot of free resources. And so it seems to me that you're just so passionate about this work that you're doing.
Yeah, I think it's all just evolved very naturally. So I started my classes, but I always liked technology. So I always had a website and a blog and sending newsletters to the people who came to my classes. And all of a sudden, people from all around the world were contacting me. And so I was like, oh, I better start a blog. So then I have the Montessori Notebook where I get to share all the things that I love doing in my classes so that people from anywhere can benefit from the information. Because again, just like you, when you found Montessori, it's like, oh, this is such an easier way to live with your child. This is so respectful. And also for the adult, it's a really rewarding and calm way to be with children. So as many people who can benefit from the information, I make it free. And then people who want to go deeper can follow like an e-course or one of the workshops that I run online. And then I get the benefit of also working in the classroom during the day. And we have 8 classes a week. So there's 12 children in each class, and they come with their parents. And so I get to work with 100 families face to face as well. So I love that.
Oh my goodness. Wow, you're busy. But it sounds like a definite joy. Well, for my listeners who aren't as familiar with the Montessori method, would you be willing to just explain a little bit what it is and how it kind of works with both the school aspect as well as at home?
Definitely. So I think that people would recognize in traditional education where a teacher stands at the front of the classroom and decides what the children need to learn. And it's a very top-down approach to education. So everyone then sits in their chairs and they get bored. And that's how I went to school. I remember putting up my hand, is this in the test? And if it wasn't in the test, I didn't ever pay attention.
Right.
And then when I had my own children, I'm like, oh, actually, I really want them to love learning and I want them to make discoveries for themselves. And actually, rote learning things is not going to be very useful for children these days. They need to be creative thinkers and learn how to solve problems. So when I learned about Montessori, I heard I found that what they do, it's very different. Instead, you have a triangle between the child, the adult, and the environment. And there's this beautiful prepared learning environment where there's a rich curriculum. Materials are laid out in a really sequenced, logical order for them to learn mathematics, or for them to learn language, or for them to explore geography and culture. And there's always this practical life component, because children actually, really the young children, love to learn about taking care of their environment and themselves and others. So you can apply these principles at school, and then what I do is apply the same principles at home and have a learning environment where parents can come with their children to explore and learn in the Montessori environment for this age. And so I just love that they work with like concrete materials, so like it's very hands-on learning. You have mixed age groups so that the older children are modeling for the younger children, and the younger children are watching and learning like so easily from the older ones in the class. And it's just a natural, respectful way to work with the children, where the teacher's not in charge of the child's education, but the child's in charge of their own education, and the teacher's the guide and helping them and giving them lessons where they're up to, and everyone's on their own individual development and their own timeline.
Yeah, the whole schooling method is so different from what I experienced, and also like you said, what you experienced. And I think it sets the children up to be better prepared for being adults, because, as they grow and they become older, they're not going to be in situations where someone will be telling them what to do, but they will often have to take their own initiative and have their own independence. And so I love how the Montessori method really does foster that independence. It fosters their growth, their own inner compass of figuring out what is right and wrong for them, as well as when they're interacting within an environment and interacting with others. And so it's such a really beautiful and unique approach to childhood.
And I think until you really observe in a Montessori classroom, you might think, well, no one's going to do any work if no one's making them do it. And you have to go and see it for yourself, because the children, you walk into a classroom and it looks so beautiful. You just want to touch the materials and you're engaged with them. And then also it follows every child's unique interest. So if they're interested in starting with maths, they can go over and choose a maths work, and they might sit next to a friend who's chosen a language work, and then they can work with that for as long as they like until they want to move on to the next thing, so they can flow with their energy. Or I might just go and sit in the book corner and read some books until I feel like I've got the energy to do something else. Or it's also completely valid to observe another child, to be standing and watching someone else get a lesson, because yourself that you can often pick things up a lot just from watching other people. And then I also love that the older children help the younger children, and you consolidate your learning that way. If you can explain it to another child, then it's just continually consolidating the ideas for yourself as well.
Yeah. My oldest did go to a Montessori preschool, and I went and observed a few times, and it is so different because, you see all these children are so quiet and they're so focused, and it's so different from, other preschools that I've had the opportunity to be in. They're more lively and loud, and not that there's one, preference over the other, but I was always so amazed to see 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds just so engrossed in their work because of the absolute joy of it. Like they aren't thinking about the time. There isn't someone telling them how to do it, because the materials are set up so that they can work through it on their own. And I just really appreciated that my daughter was allowed to kind of foster her own interests and to pursue them.
Yeah, and I love that it also appeals to different learning types as well. So my daughter, for example, just puts her head down and just repeats and repeats until she's mastered something. But then my son, for example, is more the observer. So he would learn by watching, do it once, and then he'd have mastered it too. So it also works for like tactile learners who really need to touch and feel the materials, or for an oral or a visual learner. It also works because the materials are very visual. Or, for example, with the sandpaper letters, you're touching it as you feel the shape of the letter, and you say the letter B as you run your fingers around the letter and you're seeing it. So it works on so many different levels. And also what I love, like some children who can't sit still, Montessori is perfect for them as well, because it's not just these quiet children, but if you need to move, then there's a lot of movement built into the activities, like practical life. You put on an apron, you go and get water, you bring it back, you pour it into the bowl, you go again and get some more water. And there's always lots of movement when they're working with many of the different activities. And then just also, if you have finished your work at the moment, you've put your activity back, you can walk around the classroom. You're not having to sit in a chair falling asleep and feeling irritated. And actually often they're very distracting in a traditional environment because they can't sit still. Where in a Montessori environment, they can move around and use that energy in a positive way.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Well, and as for like the practical life, where does that stem from? The whole inviting children to be helpful and to partner in the cleaning or the cooking or the dusting. Where does that come from?
Well, Dr. Montessori, 100 years ago, when she set up her first, they called it Casa de Bambini, which means House of Children, she found that the children wanted to help her take care of the environment. So she found small brooms so that they could be more successful than using, adult-sized brooms that are twice their height. And they loved being involved in the food preparation. So rather than playing with dolls and things, they really wanted to take part in preparing the meals. And so she made that possible by simplifying the activities or finding utensils that they could use themselves. And then now we've applied those principles, and you'll see now on Instagram many people applying the same principles with their children, and they love taking part. They want to be part of this family, and rather than having their meals served, they often take more interest when they're involved in that process. And it can be even as far back as planting seeds and growing your own vegetables and pulling out some herbs to add to the dinner, and having a learning tower. Or even, when my son was very small, this was before Instagram and learning towers. So we just had a step ladder, from the hardware store that we would open up, and he would climb up and stand at the top of the step ladder to help wash vegetables while I was cooking. And then gradually they're adding more and more steps to it. And you just see, kind of like you said before, just for the sheer joy of it, and not because they're being rewarded or being paid to do it, but because they're contributing, and they really love water, for example. So anything like washing the dishes or cleaning the windows, these kind of activities are always going to engage young children. And purposeful activity is actually really satisfying as well. I love open-ended creative activities, but actually it's very satisfying when you master something. It's like, I did it. So that's something I think that's quite unique in Montessori activities, that might separate it from some other educational approaches as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and so when you published your book, The Montessori Toddler, I ordered a copy as soon as I found out about it. And it's such a beautiful book. I'm holding it right now. It's very inspiring, but it's also very practical. It is just so full of great information. And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the book and what inspired you to write it.
Well, my inspiration was the parents that come to my classes, and they're always full of amazing questions. But I also found the same questions coming up a lot, or they'd ask me what books that I would recommend. And so I'd say, okay, read this part of this book and read this part of this book. And I had to refer them to lots of places. And then after a while, I was like, I think I can just put this all in one book, and then I don't have to, it will do a lot of my work for me. This will have a big impact. And also, I'm just a kind of practical person. I like reading Dr. Montessori's writings, but they're not accessible for a tired, mother of a toddler who doesn't really have time to read a book, let alone a really serious, it's hard reading, actually. Very inspiring, but hard reading. So I really wanted to make it easier to read and beautiful. So one of the parents who came to my classes, Hiyoko, is a Japanese illustrator. And when I had the idea to write the book, she asked if we could collaborate. And I just jumped at the chance. And every time I'd send her, like, I need a table that represents the 4 planes of development. And what I'm thinking is, like, I want the little seed being planted in the first plane of development. Anyway, I describe it to her. And then she'd send back to me this beautiful illustration illustration that was exactly what I meant, but even more beautiful than I could have imagined. And it just adds, she did the whole book layout and design to make it really light and airy and easy to read. So the way I write is very short. I write as I speak, so it's very easy to read, and people who know me say that they can hear my voice.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear. I mean, it's, like I said, it's very comprehensive, and I find myself referring back to it. You know, my children are, I have an almost 2-year-old and up to a near 8-year-old. All my children are having their birthdays in the next few months. And so, you know, I have found the information so valuable. And, you know, I did want to ask you about parenting from a Montessori approach. And I had bookmarked a page in your book at the very beginning where it says toddlers are brilliant. And I love this page so much because I feel like so often in parenting, you know, there's these really hard expectations both on us as parents and on our children on how society thinks that they should act. And I feel like this page, it just really gives parents permission to trust their children and to trust themselves. So like, for example, I loved this one. It says, what seems to be intentionally going slow to wind us up is actually them exploring everything in their path. And so I just really appreciate how you give parents and children the permission to simply be who they are. So all that to say, how could we incorporate Montessori into our parenting approach?
Yes, I think you've really hit on something that's very special to me. I really feel like I'm an advocate for toddlers because I love them. And
yes.
I don't think if you Google toddlers are brilliant, it comes up with any results. But I'm hoping that my book will hopefully change that. Yeah, exactly. Toddlers are brilliant was a new hashtag.
There you go.
But I just love that they are so curious about the world around them. They speak from their heart. They don't have any agenda. They just live in the very present moment. And so I wanted to also share with parents who usually we get told that, they go through the terrible twos and they're going to be really hard work. But actually, it's exactly what you say, to see that these are small little seeds and we want them to grow into the most beautiful version of themselves. And how can we be their guide and support them in that growth? So instead of seeing them as, throwing themselves on the ground, having a tantrum as being difficult and giving us a hard time, is actually they're having a hard time and we're there to be the calm guide that they need. And then I give them really practical steps. For example, if your child throws himself on the ground to have a tantrum, about half children will push you away and half of them will want to be cuddled. And so the first step is really just to get them to calm down, because if you've ever had a toddler throwing a tantrum, you know that they can't even hear you. So you're telling them that, it's just because, the supermarket's closing, or, trying to rationalize with them just will fall on deaf ears. So that first step is really just to calm them down. And if your child wants to be cuddled, then offer them a cuddle. And if they push you away, then you can keep them safe and you can say, I'm here if you need me. And then once they've actually calmed down, and often you hear the toddler go, and they have that big kind of sigh, you kind of go, okay, now we've moved on, and you can explain how difficult that was. And then actually if they have tipped everything out of the house and pulled all the cushions off in their rage, then that would be a time that then they can make amends. And then you can show them about taking responsibility for what they've done. So I really like helping parents, navigate the both sides. Is that how can I support my child and also show them how to take responsibility for their actions? I love giving children lots of freedom because that's how they build curiosity. And so instead of giving them answers, we talk about how you can raise children to discover things for themselves. But on the other hand, does that mean that I have to let them do whatever they want? And there's actually no, sometimes it's bedtime and, the parents have to have rest too. So it's also that balance of everyone is in this family has needs, and how can we all have our needs met? So parenting Montessori style often looks like slowing down, being more intentional, involving children in our daily life rather than, entertaining them, putting the TV on while we cook, but involving them in all of that daily life, and also preparing our homes in a more intentional way so that they can have more success in how they can help themselves, for example, getting dressed or preparing for a snack. Can they get their own bowls from the cupboard, and lots of things like that.
Yeah. Well, and that actually brought up another thought for me. I hear from so many parents that they are just completely overwhelmed with parenting. And with just trying to juggle everything that modern life tends to throw at us with our work schedules and the kids' needs and family and friends and all of that. And so, I hear from moms where technology often becomes the solution, the main solution in the home, where it is easier to put on a show while they're cooking, or it is, easier in the supermarket to hand them your phone. And so, Simone, what would you recommend for a parent who is interested in dialing that back and becoming more intentional with the way that they parent? Can they change that path with their children?
I definitely think so. I mean, my children grew up in a time, believe it or not, before iPads and iPhones existed. And that was only my son's only 18. But we used to go to a cafe, and instead of giving them an iPad, we'd have books. And I'd pack a little bag of things toys we'd play with. And I always carry a notebook. I've got delightful drawings from any toddler that's ever had coffee with me. So we keep them entertained. We'd get up and go for a walk and watch the people cooking in the kitchen. So it's actually sometimes you need to be more engaged, and then you can find other ways to relax. So, okay, while my child's getting dressed and going very slow, then I might have a cup of tea. Like we talked about, like instead of putting on the TV while we're preparing meals, we can invite them to join us, or they can play in the kitchen. So even with a young baby, I had a little bar with a mirror, and my daughter would pull up and sit down and pull up and sit down while I was, preparing some food. Or also I like doing it like Italian style, where I just bring all the food to the dining table and we'd all sit around and talk and kind of prepare food together. So it can also be messy. You have to allow more time. And so I'm not saying if you're a working mom and you get home and you have to get food on the table, that's going to be the moment where you're going to have this beautiful moment of food preparation. It might be more simply, let's see how you set the table and I'll do this, and you might be allocating some tasks, or you might have more time maybe just to allow a couple of hours on the weekend where you can do some more of those family activities together.
I think those are great suggestions, and allowing your family to move toward a more intentional approach instead of just saying, okay, we're going to change this today and it's going to be completely different and the children have no idea what's going on. But taking your time and, like, as you said, including them in the cooking, or giving them a rag so that they can clean the table before dinner time, or something where they're getting involved, but it doesn't take more effort than they're used to. And then you can slowly work up to more involvement and more family activity together.
And you can also see as well, like if you're on your phone a lot, then they're going to find that super interesting. So sometimes it also has to be intentional about us putting away our phones. So I never had the TV on, for example, during the day when my kids were awake. So it was never that attractive. And I think that with our mobile phones, we're always switched on. So we need to have them sometimes put away so that our children also recognize that this thing isn't so attractive that's always taking my parents' attention. So I also want to be on that too.
Yes. Yeah, I completely agree with that. It's so hard to set limits for ourselves with technology, especially I know with you run a business online. I do as well. And so it can be tempting to be always engaged, but we are modeling that behavior for our children. And what we find fascinating, they do as well. And so I appreciate you mentioning, setting the limits and boundaries.
Being a model for our children. I mean, that's another thing as well, is we can tell our children how to behave, but we actually need to be the best model of how we want to treat our neighbors and our partners and our children, and how we're speaking with them. We're constantly modeling, and that can be a way that our children will grow to be beautiful human beings as well.
Oh, I love that so much. And I always love the visual of thinking of our children like a mirror. And how we behave and we act, our children often mirror back to us. And so if we're paying attention, we can get those cues and we can make the shifts, that we need to be better humans ourselves.
Yeah.
Oh. Well, so if someone is listening to this and they're like, okay, I'm so fascinated by this, I want to start incorporating this into my home, what are some practical ways that a parent could set up their home to be more Montessori friendly?
I think that definitely making things accessible for the children gives them so much success, and they are so capable. So If you set up your home intentionally, that they can have more access. So for example, at the front door of the home, you could have a small chair where they have room to sit down, to take off their shoes or put them on. They might have more success having a basket where they can put their shoes, having a hook where they can hang up their bag and their jacket. And in Amsterdam, we need of coats and layers and all these things as well in the winter. But having a place for everything means that it's going to be less of like running around trying to find everything as you're leaving the house, but they know where things belong. Then in the kitchen, again, having a low cupboard where they might have their bowl and a glass and some cutlery so that they can help set the table. If you even come to my house today, everything's down low so that people can set the table, because the plates are really heavy, even for older children to get down. So it means that they can be involved in small things like that, and having like a water source. So instead of them having to ask for a drink, you can just have a little jug and a glass where they can pour water anytime during the day. And then in their bedroom, for example, we like having a bed that the children can get in and out of themselves, and then they don't have to cry out. They can get up and start playing in the morning. So even for young children, we might use a low floor bed or move them to a toddler bed quite young, so that they can have, access to their toys and be independent. And I think one of the things as well that you'll notice in Montessori homes is the idea of less is more. So instead of having all of the toys out and available, we tend to just have out a few toys that they're really focused on mastering, and we put the rest into storage, and we rotate them as we notice that they're, no longer using the ones that are out. And you just get so much longevity out of it. You find that the sets remain complete. You're not missing parts of things, and there's much less to tidy up at the end, before lunch, what needs to be put away. So I'd always just sit on the floor in your living room and see what it looks like from their height, because we forget that they're really little people. And when you walk into a home, you normally just see like table legs and cords, and it's not super attractive. But if you just had a little low shelf where there's a few attractive toys, then all of a sudden your children are much more engaged. The toys don't get, strewn through the whole house, and the children also feel comfortable in their home. They're part of the family. So I love incorporating them into all aspects of in every room of the home, having a little bit that they feel really cozy and comfortable in.
Yeah. And what I love about this approach is that it does make the children feel that they are so valued and they're so important to the family, that, their needs are considered, that the home is arranged in a way that makes it so that they can function as independently as possible, that they aren't reliant on an adult for every little thing. And, what I've found as I've implemented Montessori in my home over the years is that my children have become they're more self-assured. They feel confident in helping themselves around the house. They're less likely to ask me for help for basic things that they know that they can take care of themselves. But it's all because that home environment is arranged with their needs in mind, and really the whole family as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and I also just love how simple the whole philosophy is, and how you mentioned about just having a few of the toys out at a time, that until they really master them, and then you can switch them out. It's just, they're so much more engaged when they're not just completely inundated and overwhelmed by too many toys and too many things to choose from. So it's a very appealing philosophy.
Yeah, I've been to homes where they even had a lot of visual clutter, some of their own things stored up really high above bookshelves, and that does influence how a child feels in the space, so they can feel really chaotic. And then when you make it into a much calmer space, they just are more joyous and happy people to be around as well. So that's also a nice side benefit as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so how about you, Simone? How do you practice living simply? Or are there any, intentional living ideas or books that are currently inspiring you?
I think it's, for me, a journey, because it's not my natural tendency to it's my natural tendency probably to overschedule, to plan
yes.
and make life really busy, and I want to do all these amazing things. And actually the last few years I've really been thinking more intentionally about what I want to put in my days, and really only doing the things that light me up. Because if I do that, then I can show up better for the people that are in my life. And so rather than trying to please everyone, I'm much more intentional about what I say yes to. And now sometimes the problem is like there's so many nice things you could say yes to. Mm-hmm. What do you say yes to? So That's always really a challenge. But definitely just cutting back all the commitments, actually going with the flow a lot more rather than planning everything too far in advance, and means that you can have these beautiful spontaneous moments. I'm letting go of perfection a lot, and I'm currently really intrigued by this wabi-sabi. It's a Japanese term that kind of means perfectly imperfect, and I like this idea because Montessori can seem to some people that your homes have to be pristine and perfect, and it's actually not like that. Children, are messy and they're not perfect, and when they're involved, the bananas aren't going to be perfectly sliced, so it doesn't mean that we have to then correct it and make it perfect,
right?
Because they want to feel like their contributions valued, and not that you need to fix it once they're finished. So I love the idea of Robertson. I think it really complements the Montessori approach, and it's another layer that I'm really thinking about how I can make life. I'm all about the cozy, to be honest. Anything that's cozy, makes it into my book. And when I think about some of my favorite things, it's cups of tea, it's reading books, not even lots of educational books either. It can just be some great fiction as well to relax. And I like meditating as well in the mornings. That really starts the day, sets the tone of the day, rather than opening up my phone and someone's email being the first thing I react to. It's this clear space to clear my mind and to be intentional about how I'm going to live in the world that day. And there's one other thing, just based on a conversation I had with a friend recently, which I wrote about in my last newsletter, and it's about leaving happier than you came. And she's working as a leadership development person in her company, where she came up with this genius idea that people could go to work and feel better when they left work, so that when they go home to their families, they're energized, they're excited, they can be great people, as opposed to flopping on the couch and being exhausted and tuning out on our phones when we get instead. And so I kind of thought, but we should just do that in everything. And so, like, every time you walk into a cafe, I'm going to leave here better, happier than I arrived. I'm going to, when people come to my classes, I've written it on my classroom door that, leave happier than you came, because then we can be intentional rather than I'm exhausted, I want to get my kid home to have a nap. It's like, why are you here? It's to live and to appreciate all those small moments. So they're all the things that are inspiring me now to live a simpler but richer life. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Well, and I, especially on the last thing that you said about, leaving a place happier than you entered it, I feel like that's definitely a mindset of, focusing on the positive and also thinking about how our interactions with others impact them and not just ourselves. And so I feel like that's a really beautiful way to approach your days. And I feel really inspired by that. I feel like that's something I may have to start incorporating into my own life.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Well, Simone, for my listeners who are just so curious about you and everything that you offer, where can they find more of your resources? What direction should we point them to?
Well, I think you can find everything over on my blog, themontessorinotebook.com, and you can find then my Instagram from there, and think details about the book, and about if they live in Amsterdam, then they can check out my classes, which is Jacaranda Tree Montessori. So I hope to see some of them there.
Oh, thank you so much for your time today, Simone.
It was really fun. Thank you so much for having me. Great conversation.
Thank you again to our guest, Simone, for sharing with us the Montessori method. Her new book, The Montessori Toddler, A Parent's Guide to Raising a Curious and Responsible Human Being, releases on March 19th. But you can pre-order it today from your favorite online bookstore and receive some really lovely pre-order bonuses. We'll include a link to it in our show notes. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.